All right, welcome back to another episode of Wild Medicine. I am your host, Dr. Michelle Peris, and this week on the podcast, we have my incredibly brilliant associate, Dr. Diana Castleman. If you do not know Dr. Castleman, she is a naturopathic doctor, and she is NAHM certified, which is North American Menopause Society certified, and International Menopause Society certified. And her clinical focus is in perimenopause and menopause. So she is definitely someone you need to consider when you are in the menopause phase and you are located in Ontario, because she is one of the most sought after naturopathic doctors in this area. She's absolutely brilliant. And this week we have a conversation all about body composition, understanding what actually happens to our body during this transitory time. There are a lot of women who will talk about doing everything exactly the same and then not receiving the same results and feel very frustrated. So Dr. Diana shines a light as to what's actually happening to our bodies at this time. We talk about types of exercise to consider. We talk about protein consumption, of course. We talk about ideal nourishment during this time. Her thoughts on supplements and intermittent fasting as a strategy to improve fat loss in this phase. We have a really great conversation about it all. These are the topics that so many of us want to know more about, and we do an in-depth, deep dive conversation around all of these topics. So without further ado, I welcome back Dr. Diana Castleman to the podcast. All right. Welcome back, Dr. Diana Castleman.
Thank you for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
And there's really no better person to have on the podcast to have those types of conversations. When you and I met many years ago, that was really always where you wanted your clinical focus to be. And I want to say early in your career, maybe women were a bit critical of your age and being new to practice. And you're, I don't know, I think going into your third or fourth year, and already you are one of the most sought after menopause doctors in all of Ontario. You have built something absolutely incredible in Burlington. Medical doctors are aligning themselves with you, and you're providing collaborative support in a really, really profound and important way. I think you're really improving women's health, and I couldn't be prouder to be aligned and walk alongside someone as brilliant and as passionate as yourself. So I'm glad you're back.
Thanks, Michelle, for saying that. That's very kind.
I mean it. You work really, really hard, and you have a huge heart for the work that you do. So if anyone's new to you and the work that you do, let's do an introduction and really how you wound up in perimenopause menopause care.
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you that I haven't met, I'm Daiana Castleman, naturopathic doctor and Menopause Society certified practitioner. Really what inspired my practice to be here is my mom's own experience and her journey through that time. And again, it's really that lack of education, right, that doctors have around this stage of life. And I just wanted better for her, right? I wanted better care for her. I wanted her to have informed conversations with her healthcare provider. And that really just prompted me to go all in. And I will say this is definitely, every day I do wake up and I feel so privileged and so, I feel so lucky to be doing this in so many ways, because it just fuels a fire in me. And you'll probably notice from today's conversation that I can talk about this for days and days and days. But yeah, that's really what fueled me. And yeah, that's what I do today. So just really help women through perimenopause and beyond.
So we're gonna get into all of it. And one of the things that you really encouraged our clinic to include was an in-body composition analyzer, because of that understanding for women and the physiological and body composition changes of perimenopause and menopause. So can we start there and talk about why this was important to you, and what are the changes? What are women experiencing, and why is this a very helpful tool for you?
For sure. I think body composition provides us with way more detail, as you know, than, for example, the number on the scale, right? And we do know that there are body composition changes that are happening in that menopause transition. So just to actually give some numbers to this, prior to the menopause transition, for most women, they're going to experience a fat mass increase of about maybe 1% per year, right? On average, after the age of 30. Over the menopause transition, so here I'm referring to starting 2 years before your final menstrual period to 2 years after. So let's say the span of that 4 years total. that increase accelerates to 1.7% per year. And so I always talk about how the menopause transition is this vulnerable period, right, where we are seeing fat mass increase, but also we're also going to see the loss of lean muscle mass, right? So again, just knowing this is so important because we can then reframe it for everyone as an opportunity, right? As an opportunity to maybe create a different plan or a strategy around that to combat the different changes. And what is really interesting to me too is that there are different outcomes for different ethnicities and races. So we see that for white and Black women, the results are pretty similar to what I just mentioned. But for Chinese and Japanese women, we actually don't see significant increases like that over the menopause transition. So that to me is very interesting, right? When we look at some of that SWAN data, which is the study of women's health across the nation. So they have this cohort of data where they include participants from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. And I think that's really important to highlight, right? Because we can see differences there, especially for us and seeing patients in our office. Sometimes we need to also keep that in mind. So I thought that was really interesting to highlight. And then in post-menopause, so after that menopause transition, we do observe the stabilization of body composition, right? So it's really just around those 4 years that I think we, and that's where a lot of women will report. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this, Michelle, too, where women talk about like the belly fat and they're starting to notice definite changes, right, to how their body is presenting. And that for most women is around that period of time of their final menstrual period.
100%. And I think what is so important about you bringing this information forward is it's so validating of a woman's experience, right? How many women come into our office and say, I'm doing everything exactly the same I've done my whole life, yet I seem to be putting on belly fat. I seem to be gaining weight. There are these physiological changes. And I think for so many, they get disregarded in many patient appointments or working with their doctors, that this is just part of it. And so to put context to that is incredibly validating to understand that is, an observable change in many of us at that transition time. And then to be working with someone like yourself to then talk about, well, what are our options? What are things that we can do when we start to notice this happen?
Exactly. And yeah, we can definitely touch on that today as well. I know you and I are both really passionate about talking about protein intake and, also with strength training and those aspects. And I will say with protein, with the conversation, I think because so many people are talking about it now, a lot of my patients are thinking it's a trend.
Yeah.
And I always actually highlight, I'm like, no, we've actually known this for quite a long time. It's just a lot more in our awareness now. Like, it's definitely not a trend. It's one of those things that we actually have known for a while. It's just increased awareness now that more people are talking about it, which is great, right? Like, women are seeing the importance of it. And really, again, what I like to highlight here too, I don't know if you want to dive now into protein, but only about 33% of women are actually meeting the RDA for protein, right? Like that recommended daily allowance, which is the guideline for the average daily level that's required for your body, right? Depending on your particular stage and gender. And that's not a huge proportion, right? So if we're not even talking about optimal intake here. We're talking about just like what your body needs on a day-to-day basis. And that's why I think that conversation has become so important, because we actually are creating a different change, a different strategy. And what I see in my office is for women, that's actually very hard to do, because so much of our life we've been told, eat less, exercise more, right? If you're wanting to, let's say, lose weight or, see changes. And now that you're telling actually a woman to eat more protein, which typically for a lot of women translates to eating more food, it's very, very backwards, right? I'm sure you've noticed that too, Michelle. Like that mindset piece of looking at it in a different way is huge. Yeah.
It's massive. And like, I know we speak to a similar demographic from maybe different angles, although we're saying the same thing. That is, I think, one of the things I found so powerful with offering a reset as a part of the healing journey is because notoriously so many of us are under fueling with the right macronutrients. And when we start building our plates around protein, we're like, whoa, well, that's where I was misunderstanding this, right? I think there is a huge gap in our awareness about how to do this for many of us, myself included. And when we start to build our plate protein focused, yeah, it's absolutely it's transformation in terms of how we think about nourishing ourselves. And I think you're right. That whole idea of increasing protein and really combating the narratives of the early and late 90s and early 2000s about eating less and exercising more.
Yeah.
This is a very confronting concept where it can be challenging to work with someone to overcome that old narrative.
Exactly. It's the narratives that we have to challenge that we've had for so long. And I often get asked, is protein really that important? Why is it such a big conversation? I will say, there's many reasons why it's important, right? We would have a whole list, but one of the other things that I think it's such an important part of that weight management strategy is because as we lose more muscle mass, that's going to impact our metabolism too, right? So we do know that muscle burns more calories than fat at rest. And so muscle is going to be more metabolically active, right, than fat. And again, I know you talk to your patients a lot about this too, Michelle. So whenever we're talking about this menopause transition, yes, we're talking about preserving, right, what we do have, but then also building, which I think is that part too that is so important to highlight, because we can build muscle in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Age is not a limit to that. And so I always say to my patients, start where you are at. It's perfect. It's beautiful. Let's start where you are at. You can build at any stage. And I think that is a really empowering message that a lot of women need to know.
I think that's what's so encouraging too about having the InBody composition analyzer at the office is that we're able to demonstrate that women of any age are putting on and building muscle. And when they do that, it actually profoundly shifts their body composition ratios. So building muscle actually helps mitigate how much fat loss someone might need to do. And so I think when we have a different, more higher level, positive, encouraging conversation around this, I think it really helps reduce the amount of pressure on women feeling like they need to shrink themselves or do less, because really they want to take a proactive approach, and focusing on building muscle can be really encouraging, and being able to demonstrate how much that improves not only their metabolic health, but the fact that they're building muscle and shedding body fat and visceral fat as a result of that is so impactful.
Yeah, and I think having something like body composition measurements are great if you're the type of person knowing that tracking motivates you, right? I think it's great to have that data as a tool, right? It's a tool that you can use to motivate yourself and actually see the hard work you're putting in, because we are putting in the hard work.
You're right. And sometimes you don't necessarily see the changes on a scale or for sure. Talk to me about specific exercises at menopause that women can understand a bit better or be focusing on.
So one thing I do want to highlight is around the time of the menopause transition, we do see overall, and this is what we see in research, but I will say I do see this clinically, we tend to move a lot less during this stage of life. Now, of course, there's many different reasons for that. But here I'm also specifically highlighting of something called NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's just a fancy term to say all the energy that's expended for activities that's not structured exercise. So think of your gardening, walking, you're doing cleaning around the house, things like that. And what's really interesting, the pandemic is a great example of this, where for a lot of us that really decreased, right? Because we were no longer maybe going to the office, you weren't walking to and from the lunchroom, everything was such in a close vicinity that our step count really decreased for a lot of us. And so that is one thing I do like to highlight for a lot of my patients around this time, because what can happen for a lot of us is we live very busy lives and depending on your individual situation, you might be caring, for aging parents, which is really difficult for a lot of people. You might have children that, need you around a lot. Whatever the case is, that structured form of exercise, I have an hour to go to the gym, can start to really fall off, right? Because of time. And so what I like to emphasize is, and I love this term, I don't know actually who coined it, so I apologize, but I've been seeing it around in the fitness space, this thing called exercise snacks.
I'm obsessed.
So, I love that term, because it's these little bouts of activity that you can do that, again, increases your heart rate, right? And gets you moving. But that's not again, an hour, right? It might be a 5-minute thing that you're doing. And I actually think that's so powerful, right? Because again, you are expending more energy. So I always try to, meet the patient where they're at and ask things like, can you take a movement break, like a exercise snack and do, 20 push-ups? Can you do like the chair squats, right? Where you stand up, sit down for 10, 15 times and maybe do that 3 times a day. So again, there's always actually a way to move our bodies, but sometimes we just have to become creative. Or you're dropping your kids off for practice, but instead of watching in the stands, you're doing, loops around the ice rink or, the baseball diamond, wherever, whatever activities your kids are doing. So we can get creative of what that looks like. And in our minds, we're like, well, is this really doing anything? And it is. We're still moving. That's the whole point, is we don't want that movement to drop off during this time. So we want to keep that up. And when we look at the guidelines, like the recommended guidelines for exercise, which if we're talking about moderate activity, it's 150 minutes a week. For vigorous activity, that's 75 minutes a week. About 85% of the population are not meeting these requirements, right? Like that's huge. So again, this is not coming from a place of judgment at all. It's about just saying, like, let's just meet you where you're at. Like, what does that currently look like for you? And if you're doing it, fantastic, keep going. And if not, like, how can we help support you, right? To get you to a place where you are moving, because every bit matters. I will always highlight that. Like, anything you can do and fit in. Again, these little words of exercise snacks, they make a huge difference.
Yeah, I just recorded a whole episode on it because I feel like I am your demographic. I am heading into perimenopause. Whether or not I meet the criteria, I certainly have some symptom expression of it. And one of the things I noticed is, because I'm active, I do work out, I was fooling myself a little bit that was enough for the whole day. And so I hadn't really built in exercise snacks. So for the rest of the day, I might sit and work. Right. And then when it was required that I needed to walk long distances with my family, I really struggled. And that was shocking to me, because I was like, well, I'm the most fit. I'm the one that goes to the gym and does all the things. But this is why this movement built into your entire day is so important. And I love the idea of doing something for 5 minutes. I think the other thing I would add is, having done a lot more in-body composition assessments at the clinic, we noticed that women have a lot of upper body muscle mass that meets the standards of where we want to see them as they age in terms of supporting their quality of life and activities of daily living. A lot of women have reduced or suboptimal lower body strength. And so being able to have that conversation of, what if after every 90 minutes of work, you got up and you did some squats or did something that, was going to be very strategic at helping you build specific muscle? Because, one of the conversations I've been having with women is, your leg strength is going to be really critically important post-menopause for preventing falls, which is a huge predictor of longevity and quality of life. So, to your point, I think there's just simple things we can do, like parking further and walking. And our life was radically changed with COVID and being home more and just sedentary as a result. And I don't think I even realized for myself how much that slowed me down.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It happens a little bit over time, to the point where you're like, time has passed. And the next thing you know, it's a huge difference. But because now that's your new baseline, it's harder to reflect back on where you were, right? But yeah, I would say that's a huge one. And again, of course, with the menopause transition can come a lot of symptoms, right? So if women are not feeling well, they're not sleeping well, whether you have hot flashes, night sweats, other sort of symptoms that are getting in the way of you being able to move your body, that's of course something to address with your healthcare provider too, like to get support for that. If you're feeling such low energy that you can't actually exercise, it's so important to actually treat that and get the support you need. And so, and I know we're not diving into menopause hormone therapy today, but one thing I want to say is I see it as a tool that can bridge that gap, right? So you're currently at point A, you're not feeling well. We want to get you to point B where you're moving your body, you're sleeping well, you're eating well, all those pieces. Menopause hormone therapy can be that tool to get you from point A to point B. Now, again, it's not for every woman and depends on what your symptoms are, but that's where that support comes in, right? So it's about, how do we get you to a place where all of these foundations of our health become your consistent, it's the consistency of these basics that matter the most, right? And that's where I'm trying to get patients to, those consistency of those habits.
I think that's where you've been so helpful. And I want to highlight, you might feel like you say this all the time for your community, but let's emphasize for any woman out there who might be hearing you for the first time. One is, menopause hormone therapy can be considered, or at least have a conversation during that perimenopausal phase where you're symptomatic, but you still are bleeding, even if it's every month? And two, just to quickly speak on both of these things, do you need to test for being in perimenopause or menopause?
Referring to female hormones.
Yes.
So for, let's say, the average person, no, we do not need to test your female hormones because they're constantly fluctuating in perimenopause. And I actually think we did a podcast episode on this. So
We'll connect it.
Yeah. But for example, if you have, you've had a hysterectomy or you have an IUD and you actually don't have periods and you don't know where you are on that journey, sometimes we can use, testing to kind of guide us where we are. But for like just this conversation today, for most women, they do not need to get their female hormones tested. So again, your estrogen, your progesterone, FSH, LH tests.
And you deserve to have that conversation around receiving treatment, because exactly to your point, if it gives you the energy or ability to sleep at night, which allows you to be active, it's massively important. As I think a lot of women are still, even though maybe menopause is as trendy as protein right now, there's still a lot of miscommunication about this.
I mean, look, there's a ton more awareness information, which I think is awesome. But I will also say that I think a lot of women are also drowning in misinformation too at the same time, right? And that's
100%.
something really important to highlight as well. And sometimes we don't know what is misinformation and what's not, right? And that's why I think always coming back to having a trusted healthcare provider that you can have these conversations with is huge.
Love that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you are talking about protein with patients. Like how are you having that conversation? What are your areas of focus with it? And how are you helping women get closer to the RDA, if not optimal levels of protein consumption?
Yeah. So typically what I'll do is I'll start by asking what a typical day would look like for them. We kind of walk through what they, like let's say a Monday to Friday might look like. I actually do love to ask about the busiest days, because if we can make it work in your busiest days, then I know we can definitely make it work on days where, it's not as so much on the go.
Love that.
So we talk about what that would look like in terms of also meal times too is very important. So are you back ending your day where you're leaving all your calories for the end of the day? Are you having more of a structure, 3 meals a day? Are you fasting? Like all those things. I do want to know that information. And based on what they tell me, what they're eating, I can, just ballpark, having done this so many times now, like approximately how much that is. So it's not like I'm going through and calculating that exact number, but I'll give them that tool to use for themselves. But I can ballpark, okay, if you're having this, this, and this is approximately this many grams. I will say in my experience, for most people, it's the breakfast and lunch that I think we can optimize for sure, the earlier parts of the day. For many of us, maybe we're eating dinners with our family. And so we typically have like a protein, fiber, carb with that. But I would say the breakfast and lunch are huge aspects. So very easy to skip lunch or skip breakfast, or you're on the go, you're having like the kids, leftovers or whatever that looks like. And again, that could be 2/3 of your day, right? That we could be optimizing, which is huge. Now, depending on what their goals are, whether they're wanting to lose weight, maintain weight, whatever that looks like, I will typically, aim to have 20 to 30% of their total energy intake come from protein, part of their day-to-day. So again, whatever that total calorie diet looks like. So I'm aiming for typically 20 to 30% of the total energy intake to come from protein. So let's say, you're eating on an average 2,000 calorie diet, 100 grams of protein, that would be about 20% of the total energy intake. So again, right, like just ballparking some numbers. And it doesn't mean we have to always get so specific with numbers, but I actually do think it helps my patients really understand what that plate looks like, or what we mean by 25 to 30 grams, because a lot of us, like I said, we're new to this. I remember when I first tracked my protein intake, I was shocked.
Me too.
I definitely thought I was getting way more than I was like, I'm sure I'm doing great. I'm way over the RDA. No, was not even hitting it. So yeah, it's just more of a, like I said, a realization to say, okay, that's okay. Here are the things I can work on. So we might start off by working with one meal first, right? To say, okay, breakfast, can you get this consistently for, X 4 weeks? I just want you to do this one thing to really get into the habit of it. And then we might build on top. So sometimes nutrition can feel overwhelming, which again, I like to do it in these smaller pieces because we can always build on it, right? And sometimes just honestly having a regular breakfast that has all your nutrition can be a game changer.
Game changer,
right?
Especially for those back end eaters, like you were talking about, the 8 p.m., your blood sugar drops. Likely your breakfast is where you misfueled.
Yeah. And I know for myself, when I've had days where, work was really crazy and maybe I didn't really prioritize it, I will come home and if there's a bag of chips, I'm eating the bag of chips, right? It happens to all of us. And I'm not talking about, the days here and there that it might happen. We are looking at the 80-20 rule, essentially, right? 80% of the time, are you able to kind of stick to this structure? And the other thing I want to highlight is it can be delicious and nutritious and you can love
100%.
it. I think sometimes when we hear this, we're like, I don't know, I don't like that structure and I feel boxed in, and equate having more of that structure with not enjoying our eating. Yeah, less fun. But we can definitely make it very enjoyable for sure. And I think a lot of us actually thrive on routine and consistency.
Okay, we get it. It is super confusing to figure out how you should be eating, and you've probably been hearing a lot more about increasing your protein consumption. We've got you covered. If you are looking to understand how much protein you might want to consider, then please go check out our calculator. It will help show you what this looks like for your ideal body weight, what that looks like per meal and throughout the day, on days that you're strength training and on days where you're just a normal gal about the town. If you are looking to understand protein a bit better and want to bring that conversation to your regulated healthcare professional, then please go check out our calculator online in the show notes so that you can have a more strategic approach to your nourishment and to your protein levels. Your future self and vibrant energy will thank you. One of the beautiful things that we've been able to see through offering a metabolic reset program, where we are improving insulin levels and blood sugar levels and inflammation and lipid panels, is that patients are able to follow that 80-20 rule with a lot of fun and a lot of a lot of liberties built in, and able to maintain their new set point. So there is this, possibility. This is a thing where it doesn't have to be strenuous or hard. It is about learning food. And I really like that you bring that up. I do think there is a lot of value in understanding and tracking, not from a hypervigilance, but like simply information gathering, because so many of us are like, well, I had 2 eggs at breakfast. That like, I am protein. I'm killing the protein game. And you're like, that's 12 grams. If we're going for 30, where's the other, 2/3 coming from, right? So I think this is just an important thing to shine a light on, because it was life-changing for me. I had no idea how I was misfueling myself. And once that information was there, I felt very empowered. I could go in any situation and eyeball my plate and know how to feed myself, because I felt great. And also to see the metabolic flexibility on the other side of that, of being able to have an 80-20 lifestyle is such an ideal situation, I think, for anyone we serve. So I love that you say that. Do you get asked a lot about supplements for weight loss? Is that something that happens in your practice?
Do you get asked a lot?
No, but I have a firm, I have a very clear approach.
I definitely do get asked a lot about that. And, just as a one statement, there are no supplements for weight loss. I think we're actually very clear on that. And, and this is the thing, this requires work, right? It's the putting in the work, but it's maybe having someone on your team who can help you guide it. You don't have to do this all on your own. I just want to highlight that. You don't have to feel overwhelmed by this. But yeah, if we're talking specifically about, the marketing industry that is worth, billions of dollars, that are targeting women around menopause, that are selling, these supplements, and just be very aware of that for sure, because you're going to get marketed to, right?
The evidence is clear. There is no secret. And I think why this is so important to highlight is that having a menopause focused doctor like yourself, having that as part of the tools is way better investment in strategy over time, because you're going to have individualized, comprehensive conversations about how to structure your plan during this time frame. And clearly one of the most important time frames for women, where there's a massive amount of transition and we need support. And that's why we are marketed to. We're so vulnerable and we want a solution. And I think having, really speaking to the truth of that really helps us think about, okay, well, how would I like to reallocate my resources for strategy and something that works instead of, being marketed to, in a vulnerable state. It's nobody's fault. It's a vulnerable time where people feel genuinely quite mystified about what's happening. And so I think having that conversation, having someone like you as a part of their strategy is a way more strategic investment that's going to have a greater return on investment over time.
Yeah, I think you said that perfectly. Now, want to bring this up because I have a feeling many people are thinking about it. One supplement that I get asked a lot about is creatine.
Oh, great one.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. So for those of you who haven't heard of creatine is a compound that your body naturally makes, but you can also get it from protein-rich foods. So the food sources typically come from animal products. So if you're a vegan or vegetarian, you're going to be more naturally low in creatine. The highest concentrations are found in red meat, seafood, poultry, and then there's some small amounts in dairy as well. But essentially, creatine is stored in the muscles and where it's used for energy, right? It's the main energy currency that our muscle cells do use. Now, we've historically thought about it as a lot for bodybuilders, right? For athletes. And I just want to highlight too that I think creatine can be very safely used for a lot of people in the right dose and the right form. And you might not identify as an athlete, but if you're exercising, regularly intentionally with a goal, I think all of us are athletes from that perspective, right? And we need to fuel appropriately. Now, what I want to highlight here is that, yes, there is a lot of research for, muscle mass, right? For supporting muscle mass and strength. But that's when we're combining creatine with strength training exercise. Okay, so we do not see the same benefits when you're doing creatine alone without exercise. And I think that's very, very important to highlight. If we're wanting to actually see the muscle mass benefits, that has to be in combination. Okay, so if we're taking it, but then we're not doing any exercise, again, I don't think you're going to see the benefits there. Now, a lot of the newer studies that are coming out are looking at the benefits of it for mood and cognition and cognitive health. And I think that's very exciting because I think we are going to have many more uses for it, beyond the muscle mass piece. And one that really excites me a lot is the bone mineral density piece. So we're starting to look at it in postmenopausal patients. If we're supporting their muscle mass, can we actually support their bone density too, which I think is very exciting. So again, there's a time and a place to have that conversation again with the healthcare provider of where it might fit into your routine. But that doesn't mean, again, across the board that everyone, needs to take it. Again, it can be very specific to your individual goals.
Love that.
Yeah.
There's just so many thoughts and opinions around intermittent fasting. And so how are you having this conversation with women? Because I'm going to say maybe 5 to 7 years ago, it was all the rage. And now there's a lot of confusion. And I'll say I even spent years intermittent fasting, feeling like it was helping me. But yeah, where do you stand on that?
Yeah. So, if you've ever done intermittent fasting and you maybe saw some benefits to it, I'm talking specifically here as a weight management tool, it works really because we're decreasing our eating window, right? And so for a lot of people, when we decrease our eating window and say you can only eat from this time to this time, we're decreasing the amount of calories that we're eating typically, right? If we're decreasing that window. Now, what I will say clinically is everyone's lifestyle is different. This definitely doesn't work for every single woman. Also have to remember that if we're doing, let's say, a 12 or 13-hour fast from when we ate dinner to when we're eating breakfast, that's still considered a really good fast for your body, right? So it doesn't need to be extremes at all. It's not something that I regularly recommend to my patients. Again, for a lot of us who live very busy on the go lifestyles, I actually think we need to sort of check in with that and say, okay, if I'm pushing myself to not eat till 12, actually impacting my mood, my irritability, we can actually potentially feel more irritable, right? If we're, let's say, starving by 12. So I think it's not a universal thing that I recommend. And again, I'm also want to highlight, if it works for you, great, as long as you're still getting those nutritious pieces in, right? Are you still hitting your protein, your fiber in those 2 meals a day? What does your actual eating window look like? I think that's also very important because you want to be getting that nutritious food in that time, you're able to meet all your health goals and it works for you, great. But also don't feel like you have to do it because you heard somewhere that it's like the thing to do for management and menopause. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Can you speak to me about what you think is the most effective diet for women who are anyone really, but women specifically in this perimenopause, menopausal phase?
Yeah, I think the most effective diet is the one you can adhere to the most, right? Like, again, coming back to our conversation of the 80-20 rule, like what is the diet that we don't have to label it anything, we don't have to give it a name. We can just focus on the pieces, right? I know we talked a lot about protein, but I also want to highlight, of course, fiber is very important too, right? Are we getting our 30 grams of fiber a day? That comes into play, of course, for helping manage, cholesterol levels and metabolic changes that we're seeing. So I'm more focused on those individual pieces as opposed to labeling it anything, because I think when we label something, we can start to really feel like if we veer off track, then, we almost like lose our identity in that. I don't know. There's something about, and again, like I said, that's just what I see for myself clinically. So I focus on, fiber. Calcium is a big one, right? With menopause and making sure we're getting the 1,200 milligrams of calcium per day over the age of 50. So those are things I'm more focused on. I don't think it needs to be, there is no menopause diet. There's no diet that is, the best diet for you. It's about incorporating these different pieces to it.
This episode is brought to you by the Poppy Clinic. If you're looking for an integrative approach, our team of naturopathic doctors is there to support you every step of the way. Whether you're looking to learn more about period literacy or hormone balance for your tweens and teens, or you're looking to optimize fertility during that perinatal and postpartum phase, or maybe you're at the phase where you want to start having a conversation around perimenopause and menopause, or even metabolic health, we have a naturopathic doctor for you, providing support with menopause hormone therapy, labs, an integrative, customized approach, talking about nutrition and movement, and even IV vitamin therapy. There is something here for you. So if you're looking for a more in-depth conversation, individualized approach, health education and empowerment, the Poppy Clinic is here for you. If you want to go learn more, check us out at Poppy Clinic. Yeah, I think that comes back to something we both fundamentally believe, which is about making sure that you're doing what works best for you, and what works best for someone might be uniquely and distinctly different from someone else. And thing I want to highlight that it is so clear about everything that you're saying is, just how you approach even supplements, right? There's such a foundational use in our clinic, from whey protein powder to vitamin D to calcium to fiber. It really is about those basics and building in based on, what you're putting on your plate. And I think that is really important. In fact, one of our patients that we shared had shared with us that, when she came to see you, she was expecting this quintessential naturopathic experience. She would come, she would talk to you, she would leave with a bunch of supplements, and that's not at all the conversation that transpired. And just how much she appreciated that there was built-in community, intercollaborative support. It was much more, diet and lifestyle focused. And I think that's something that you are phenomenal at and really hold firm on.
Yeah, I do. And again, yes, there's the cost aspect for it too. But again, it's just to highlight that just because it's natural doesn't mean it can't be harmful, right? Like we have to really ask ourselves, like, why are we taking this? What is it for? What evidence does it have? And I would say for the most part, I'm actually just trying to take people off of what they're coming in with, because sometimes a lot of it is self-prescribed, right? Like they're going to the health food store and again, they're struggling with XYZ, and then they're sort of seeing what, is available there. And I think having these conversations, and for me, that's always the forefront of my approach with patients, education. I think that's like one of the most important things we can do is have a conversation around this. And I will say that I think the supplement conversation is very important because I actually think it's now starting to get to a point where it's too much, right? Like there's a time and a place for obviously for certain things and addressing nutrient deficiencies and all those different aspects. But that doesn't mean we need to be on 10, 20 different things to feel healthy or to be healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, to your point, just drowning and overwhelmed in misinformation with TikTok and Instagram and health food stores, and everyone has an opinion, and it's really about trying to get clear with what works right for you and creating a team that's going to help facilitate you aligning with that, right? So it seems to be vitally important. Can you tell me a time when you became aware that the work that you were doing was impacting people?
That's a good question. Sorry, I'm trying to think like
Take a minute, Joey.
Yeah, if I could think back to like I would say, I don't remember exactly when this was, but maybe I want to say last year, 2 years ago, I had a patient who came to see me and there was various different symptoms that were going on. And on her follow-up appointment, she was like a different person, right? She was just glowing and so happy. And I remember in that visit said to me, I just wished I could scream from the rooftops and want every single woman to know that this is available to them. And yeah, like it's moments like that in practice where, as I'm sure you've experienced too, Michelle, where it just like keeps you going. It reaffirms like why you're doing this. It's such a, I think it's incredibly important what we're doing, but I also don't take that for granted ever. Constantly learning from my patients, constantly being humbled by them. And I honestly do love this work because it's that constant learning. I do love that aspect of what we do, right? Like we're constantly learning and the new studies, and I love going to conferences. I love connecting with other practitioners. I really do love that aspect of what we do because I'm just as hungry for this information as every other woman. So yeah, I would say that's my answer.
I have two questions and they kind of go hand in hand, but you really are a part of a movement that is changing women's health in the best possible way. So can you speak to me a little bit and to everyone listening just about how important intercollaborative care and just this really new exciting opportunity that you have where there's going to be this opportunity for women to access medical doctors, assessment tools, you as the naturopathic doctor, to improve the outcomes and the experience of menopause, because I think this is absolutely revolutionary.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I'm really excited. So there's a clinic opening up in Midtown Toronto called Loom Woman Plus Health. And I love the founders. There's 3 medical doctors that are spearheading this and an amazing women's health advocate as well. And they're just really passionate in bridging that gap in, menopause care in Canada, which we know has been existing for long time. And it stems from that lack of education piece in medical schools. I'm sure it's going to get better, but as of right now, that's where it stems. And we know that menopause is this time where, a lot of women get forgotten about. It's one of those things that we get maybe support through our kids and pregnancy and then after children, we sort of like don't have any sort of follow-up and care around midlife. And that's what Bloom is really trying to bridge that gap. And I love their slogan, which is it's our time. It's our time, Canada. It's really our time now to empower women in midlife to, really gain that education. And it's going to be about prevention of chronic health disease, which I think that's really what us as naturopathic doctors are also so well positioned to do. So to be able to combine that with the medical community and have access to screening and tests and, have that available, I think is extremely exciting because at the end of the day, that's what every patient wants, right? They want their medical doctor and ND and pelvic floor physio. Like they want everyone collaborating, because we all, share the same mission. So I think to have that in one place is really exciting. So never worked directly alongside medical doctors. And I think I'm excited about that. They're excited about the collaboration. And so, I'll report back to see how it goes. We're planning to open end of November. So that's exciting.
It's a super cool concept. And to highlight, because I think there's just so many people out there who do seek naturopathic care who really don't believe that intercollaboration is possible. And so I think sharing opportunities like this helps people see evidence that we are working towards a new way of supporting and collaboration in the desire for prevention and what's best for the patients. And I think that's really exciting and encouraging to see that, it was the medical doctors who sought after you. And that's really through the work that you do, which I think is super cool. And just to highlight, like, also, you have been someone from the start who writes medical doctors, includes them. Like you are really, really fiercely dedicated to this idea of collaboration and what's in the best interest of the patient. And I think that's why you've had the success that you've had and why you've built what you built. And so my last question for you is really, what's the big audacious dream here? Like, what are you doing this all for?
I'm doing this all for, so let me rephrase that. I'm doing this also that one day and I hope that's in the near future, every single woman can access this sort of support and care through any of, their healthcare providers. I think this is something that every woman deserves, every woman needs to have in her life. And so I'm going to keep pushing forward and keep advocating for women to get that evidence-based care that she deserves, because just as much as we do have a lot of practitioners who are doing that, there's also the flip side, right? And so I'm just going to keep championing for women to know that they can thrive through this time in menopause. They can see really fantastic health outcomes. They can reduce their risk of chronic health conditions. And that is what excites me so much about this work is I see this impact every single day in my office. So if, I can help all those women, I can't wait to see how many more women we can help with our reach, with more integrative care.
I love it. I'm sure it is palpable to everybody, but this woman really cares about supporting women. And when I go and sneak into her office, if she's not eating a muffin with a spoon, which is something to see.
With a fork.
She's researching. She absolutely loves the work that you do. If you bring it up in conversation, she just would talk your ear off about it. Your heart and your brilliance is all aligned in one beautiful direction. And I think you're doing a lot to contribute to the betterment of women's health. And I thank you for that. And
Thank you,
if you're not following her on Instagram, you absolutely should be. Her posts are so informative, so helpful. And I think where Dr. Daiana and I are very like-minded and similar is that we're always trying to put information and programs out there so that even if you aren't in Ontario, even if you want to learn from someone who really has become masterful at their craft, there are courses and programs, and there's all different various engagement levels and intensity levels to learn. And so if you follow along with Dr. Daiana, there'll be many resources available to you no matter where you are located in the world. And I think that's super important, because if you are somewhere where you don't feel like access to Dr. Daiana is possible, there are different ways in which you can be educated and informed by her. So where can people find you should they want to connect with you?
Yeah. So I'm most active on Instagram. I do not have TikTok, and I do not plan on getting it. But my Instagram is Dr. Daiana Castleman. And then my website's DianaCastleman.com. And obviously find me at the Poppy Clinic in Burlington. And I can see patients virtually across Ontario as well. Yeah.
Thank you always for being here and just being so evidence-based and great with stats. We need you for the stats. So thank you for bringing that to us. And I appreciate
so much.
You being here.
Yeah, I love this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Wild Medicine. I am so grateful to have you here, and I hope you're feeling inspired and empowered. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. It helps us reach more incredible women just like you. And before you go, quick reminder, the information shared on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition. Please consult with your healthcare provider for personalized advice and care. And if you're ready to take inspired action and dive deeper into your own health journey, please visit us at poppyclinic.com. Let's rewild and reset your health together.